we've got over $9 million in capital reserves that are dedicated specifically to this high school project. Together, that's 27%, of essentially uncommitted funds with respect to our expenses. Their view was, well, your capital reserves are part of your plan of finance. And so the rating agencies are impressed by that. They think that's good. That's good as part of a plan of finance. But in terms of true resilience, those capital reserves, they may be expended more rapidly as part of as things go out, or at any rate, they're in play. Whereas your unassigned fund balance is really reserved for what they care about, which is your resilience to deal with any kind of shocks to the system. So that's what that language is. For us to get there, we need to increase our, if we took 3 years to get there, we need to get $6 million more into unassigned fund balance. That's the lift. That's a pretty big deal.
So is this coming exclusively from Davenport, essentially exclusively from Davenport?
Yes, that is who we've had. Those are the discussions we've had. Now we are in process right now of talking with the rating agencies because they're doing their annual surveillance. They do emphasize to us that unassigned fund balance is the thing they tend to care the most about, but it's something that is super clear in a locality's finances, and that's probably the strongest thing that they look at in any rating.
So I guess my question would be, or maybe a statement, depending on how you view it. One, I guess it'd be good to know from the rating agencies directly, right? That's really who we're concerned about, correct?
Yeah.
In other words, the point of doing what is in blue and writing here is to make a rating agency happy, right? So I think it'd be good to get that information directly from them, which it sounds like you're in the process of doing.
That's right.
I mean, I would just make an observation as well. It's sort of a double whammy. Like, in other words, when you want to borrow a lot, they want you to both borrow a lot and save a lot, which means you get hit on both sides. In other words, you have to basically potentially increase your taxes for debt service. At the same time, you may have to increase your taxes for more savings or unassigned fund balance. And so it's kind of like you're getting hit coming and going in this scenario. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad, but that's just what I observe, because that's going to be a pretty big hit. To borrow more, you have to sort of double up and save more at the same time. To borrow more, you have to save more.
Could I ask, could you translate what you just said into tax rate numbers? So you're saying an extra $2 million a year over the next 3 years, each year?
Yeah.
So you're saying another 6 cents on the tax rate to do what Davenport is recommending?
Well, what we
roughly,
I would say the simplest way that what we could do, and what we laid out in the last slide of the last presentation, would be to get there, do 4 cents on the tax rate a year early to build up those reserves. And I think that's a strategy that we would recommend.
So, I mean, I don't know if is now the time to comment, or are we just...
Sure.
I mean, I've tried to attend as many of the budget and finance meetings as I could. I must have missed the one where this was discussed. I mean, I find this to be shocking. I mean, if it's possible for you to continue the conversations with the ratings agencies and raise some of the points that the mayor raised, I think that would be useful. I mean, I would certainly like for the public to understand that, you know, the way you sketched out the 27% equivalence of a fund balance is, you know, the direction that we are headed, and that this would be in addition to that. I don't know. I mean, my concern would be, to draw it a little more broadly, that we're talking about passing a budget in April that would theoretically increase the tax rate by, I don't know, 8 or 10 cents before we have designed and made the case for the school's facilities that we're going to go to referendum on in November. And I would be afraid that since we have not had time to make that case, which I assume we'll make mostly over the summer and fall, we'd be risking some sort of earthquake that would redound to the disadvantage of whatever school facilities policy we're trying to, get passed at referendum. I mean, that's, I was going to share with the interim superintendent that what you said about, we face a challenge in the budget as we always do, and we work through it as we always have. To me, the good news is that, economic growth has been pretty robust. Assessment is up. Thanks to, our commitment to economic development over the years, we're actually in a better position, as far as I can tell from reading the newspapers, that they are in Fairfax and elsewhere. And, my, at least, personal objective is to try to get us to convince the voters to build as good and big a new high school as we can. And I'm just concerned about what I hear about how we're thinking about designing this budget tonight, that's not going to get us off on a good foot when we go to the voters next November.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Oliver?
So, Phil, on this particular item, we're taking a look at the fiscal policy. And the question is, what do we need to do to be smart about the future? And what Davenport is telling us is that to be smart about the possibility of borrowing up to $114 million, we need to put additional monies aside. So in putting this in the policy, we're acknowledging that that cost and that risk is associated with that riskier option of going above our standard policy. Separate from that, the two bodies need to make a decision about what level of financing we're willing to take on. And I think it's important to be very clear that if we are going to take on that maximum financing that we've been discussing, that there is an additional cost associated here with having the unassigned fund balance that we need to be prepared to accept. And we could talk to rating agencies and we could tweak this slightly, and maybe it's not going to be 20%, maybe it's going to be 19%, or maybe it's going to be higher, or maybe we could talk a rating agency into considering our capital reserves, or maybe not. But at the end of the day, our advisors are telling us that the lenders are going to want to see additional monies available for resilience. And that's what we're trying to put in the policy, acknowledging that we recognize that we will need to demonstrate additional resilience.
Ms. Hardy, then Vice Mayor Connolly.
So I think I understand the intent of needing to boost our unassigned fund balance. My question is how we arrived at the 20%. Because I know the 12 to 17% range was generally 2 months of expenditures. And so I get that if you're going to leverage yourself more, you need more savings in case you default, or you just have a bigger safety net. How do we arrive at 20? Feels like that percentage should be proportional to the extra amount that you're borrowing, or some relationship somehow between the two. For example, what if we went way above that? Would 20% be enough then, right?
I don't know there's any magic to 20%, to be honest. I think it's a here's the broad advice, is that rather than, and we had a lot of debate in the Budget and Finance Committee, is it better to keep your policies unchanged and break them, and have, when you break them, just have a good plan of finance and you explain why you're breaking them and how you're going to come back into compliance? Or is it better to build into your policies some flexibility that contemplates you may break them, but if you break them here, you make them stronger over there? And really what we are doing is that approach. We're going to break the 12% policy. We're going to make ourselves stronger in the way that the rating agencies care the most about. That's it operates really at that level. Now it has real world ramifications to get there. But we've been, for most of the city's history, we've been above 20%. The reason we're at 17% right now is because we have made decisions to put any money above 17% into capital reserves, or to make sure it gets programmed. when we built Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School, our fund balance was at 35%, and nobody was really paying really close attention to it other than those bond investors. So 20%, I don't think, I think we can get there.
Vice Mayor Conley?
I'm just marrying that information with the chart that we just went through.
Yeah.
And basically, it shows us exceeding the policy limit for 5 years. And then we go back below the policy limit. So if we put that money into unassigned fund balance for 5 years, we're at 20%, and we don't ever need it because everything's working out perfectly, then that money is available for capital reserves. It doesn't have to stay in unassigned fund balance forever, right?
That's correct.
So it becomes a flexible piece of our capital planning into the future if we don't need it for resilience. And if we do need it, then it's there.
I guess I'd make another comment as well. One, I mean, I appreciate conservative fiscal policies. I share them. I'm not sure keeping a lot of cash where you earn 1/10 or thereabouts, it really is a good fiscal plan for long-term savings. I mean, it's basically like putting your retirement in your Wells Fargo savings account. It ain't going to pay off in the long run. And I think we're doing a lot of that in the city. Maybe it's some of it or a lot of it's due to state regulations regarding what we can invest money in. But the reality is if we keep money 5 years, inflation is going to eat away with that. It compounds each year. And so maybe at the end of 5 years, you have 10% less money than you started with in real terms. And so I have a concern about that, and I think we do a lot of that, and I think we should really understand the full ramifications of parking a whole bunch of cash somewhere for a period of years, because time erodes the value, inflation erodes the value of money. And so I don't have a great solution for that, but I think that's something we generally have not considered in the city, and I think we ought to spend more time either figuring out how to boost our returns or to put that money effectively to use. For example, hey, we're going to use this money in 5 years, but we're going to go borrow money at 4% in the meantime for some other purpose. Well, and we borrow a little bit less money on the front end with something else, earn effectively 4% on our money, because that's what we're going to pay to bond folks potentially, as opposed to earning 1/10% on our savings, which is what we do. So, I mean, I know it's kind of convoluted, but the idea really is just to make effective use of our cash, which I'm not sure we do as a city for a lot of reasons, and that's just the point I would make.
If I may, I think as long as that money isn't being borrowed, so it's within a relatively tight time frame, and that's money you're not borrowing, then I think, I don't know what the payback period would be. Obviously, 10 years sitting at 1% is not good, but parked for a couple of years to save 4% in interest payments down the road, I think that's probably cost effective.
Well, I guess what I was saying is, for example, we got water sale proceeds a couple of years ago. That money's been sitting there and it may sit there for a couple more years. When you add all the total time up, it might be 5 years where you have about $10 million and some of that money went to, half of the money went to our pension, which is earning, presumably over time, will earn the historical norm of about 7%. The other part is earning probably more like, 0.5% or something like that, some blended rate less than 1%. And so, for example, we're going to probably borrow money for a library. We're going to borrow money for City Hall expansion or renovation. And so that's going to start the clock on 4% money as soon as we borrow it. And so I think, and I'm not necessarily saying, well, we should put our cash to work on those things instead of borrowing as much money, but I think we ought to consider that, because when we take borrow 4% money and we keep 1/10% money in the bank, there's a big delta there that we're losing out on. So that's really all I'm trying to say, is that we really, I think, ought to be cognizant of that. And that's my concern in part with keeping a whole bunch of cash for a whole bunch of years on rainy day fund. So I've said it before, and my apologies. Yeah, Ms. Vice Mayor Conley.
Last year, we agreed to allow the treasurer to invest unassigned fund balance in the VIP pool, right? And this money could also then be put into that, which doesn't make a ton anyway, but makes more than the previous investment, right?
It's still
Correct.
fairly minimal, right?
It is very minimal, and just to point out, we are limited by state laws to as to what we can invest in. So AAA bond ratings, U.S. Treasury, state, local government, bonds, those are the things that we can invest in, and they don't pay a whole lot of money. We did start investing in longer term securities, but still that's only between 3 and 5 years. It's earning a little bit more, but not much more. Certainly not enough to cover the interest rate that we're paying on some of our debt. One thing, though, there was a statement about what if we use this money in our rainy day fund to instead work towards actually building things like the library. Well, then that means there's no money in the rainy day fund. I don't know if that's sort of the question there, maybe keeping a balance of what remains in the rainy day fund versus buying down debt.
Well, I guess to me, I'd want to have that discussion because I think that when you say let's park a whole bunch of money here, to me it sort of eliminates the idea that maybe it could be put to better work in a more productive way for the city in the meantime. And so I don't have an answer, but I'm raising the question that I would like to have further discussion. And when I see things like 20% here parked in this account, and then you've got an assigned fund balance with some more money, all of a sudden you're talking about some real money that's really not earning anything for anybody. It's actually losing money over time. So that's just the point I wanted to make. I don't want to belabor the point.
Just if I could add one more thing. Yeah, when I first came on and tried to begin to understand what the unassigned fund balance was in 2013 and why it was the size that it was, I was steered towards the folks at Davenport and had a conversation with them that was fairly extensive. Now, that does not make me the world's foremost authority. I did not stay at the Holiday Inn last night, but I mean, it was helpful to me at the time to get that sort of very detailed explanation. That, I understand now our situation's different. What I basically heard at that time from them, I'm going to say emboldened me to, proceed down the course that I have since I came on council to try to keep, us budgeting conservatively, but, making sure that our money is always being put to the highest and best use. And if this is something that, other councilors are interested in exploring, this 20%, then I guess I would just ask that, maybe we could have Davenport come in and speak to us directly, make sure the press is here, get Bob Lajeunesse in the room. I mean, you know where I'm going here. I mean, this is something that we have sort of fought over for at least 4 years. And I do think that we need to do it in a more deliberative and public way, because as your memo says here, these policies that we enact do have a fiscal impact, and we don't pretend otherwise. So I guess I would just file that as a request, and I'm not sure that fits into the timetable, but I think that would be helpful.
On that note, I think we had talked previously about getting this in a commentary in the newspaper. Is that possible before a vote on this? Just so that the public's more aware, especially since it could have pretty near impacts to the tax rate.
It has not been done yet. It's on the work plan. So then, let me point out just two other that are really relevant to, I think, the high school project specifically. The next is at line 200, which is the payout ratio. We talked about that in terms of our metrics earlier in the evening. What this basically says is that, one, it explains why we have a payout ratio. And so compliance with this policy means that debt issued by the city will have a term not exceeding 20 years. In the event that an extraordinary capital project requires a financing term that exceeds 20 years, but not to exceed 30 years, the city will take such steps as necessary to return to policy within 5 years. Now, when we model our debt service, we come into compliance in 5 years. And so, in some respects, this language is convenient because the way we've modeled it, we think we're going to achieve that. It's just it creates some flexibility, and then it creates a timeline to get back into compliance. So nothing too clever about it, but it follows the philosophy of, instead of breaking a policy, acknowledge it and have a plan. Then the last one that's relevant to the extraordinary capital project, and that's sort of a phrase of art that you see in 3 places in the financial policies, and the last one is at line 317. And that is basically a statement, this is not unusual in municipal finance, that capital reserves may be used for debt service provided there is a planned financing program as part of an extraordinary capital project. Now, that's not our practice today, and this policy would basically embrace that as a viable plan of finance for an extraordinary project. So those are the ones that are really relevant to the high school project. There are a few others that are noteworthy, and I can just summarize those very quickly. I would point you to line 320. And this is the setting a kind of a level of effort target for pay-as-you-go capital at $1 million per year. The city shall approve a capital program that includes both cash funding from general revenues and may include debt issuance. Debt issuance shall be made only within the parameters of the debt management policies enumerated in this policy. And the city's goal, and this is the salient piece, the city's goal for cash funding is at least $1 million per year. Any funds not appropriated for use shall be placed in the capital reserve. We currently have $460,000 of pay-as-you-go funding. That's part of the reason for the discussion for the $600,000 FY18, but $600,000 is also what our practice has been over the past decade or so of what our annual cash reinvestment in our capital plant has been. And it's for things that are not really suitable, or, you know, it's not great to debt finance HVAC system repairs and elevator repairs and things like that. So you do need some cash for those types of things.
But the policy doesn't necessarily direct whether it's personal property. I mean, you're just sort of referencing personal property or equipment or fixtures. There's no differentiation, though, between seeking to not debt finance personal property versus, you know, capital, real property. Like you sort of verbally suggested there was a difference. You don't want to finance HVAC system, which is like a fixture. It's not a building. But there's no differentiation. You guys are not recommending a differentiation in here as to not debt financing things that have short life, right? Like a school bus.
We don't speak to that specifically, although we do. There is a policy that says no debt shall be issued for an item that has a depreciation schedule that is shorter than the term of the debt. That is in your policies. So, for instance, when we do police cars, we structure it as 5-year debt. That's how long we use a police car for.
Okay. Anything else of note you'd like to mention?
I think those are kind of the main points.
Questions, comments?
Could I just ask a question about that 1 million? So that number comes from, am I right, the staff report on line 47 has a set of numbers that explain where we get $1 million, that we have 106 million in capital assets, replace them every 10 years equals 1 million equals 1%. Is that, we had talked earlier about, you know, again, trying to explain to people how many police cars and dump trucks and sand loaders and so forth that we have. Is this the sort of simple way to convey that?
I think Richard LeCondre came up with that specific sentence. Is that correct?
He did. That formula was Mr. LeCondre's formula. But yes, it's...
Pleased to know that he actually answered my question, or at least tried.
It is 1% of existing capital assets, and that's basically, and I don't know if we've talked to our DPW folks about it, it's a maintenance effort to just keep the buildings working. Buildings and also replacing the smaller machinery and equipment that we do own.
Do we have the hologram of Richard that we can play?
Yeah, really. I guess I would say again, you know, I mean, I'm not looking to make more work, but, you know, this is a significant amount of money too, obviously, and would require a tax increase. And so, you know, some sort of an asset replacement schedule spreadsheet. Yes, sorry, me too. That's Richard coming back.
There he is.
You were supposed to play that a while ago. Good.
Some sort of asset replacement schedule that you probably have tucked in some drawer somewhere that, again, could be shared with the public. So you can answer the question, you know, why do we have to buy sheriff's cars so often here in Falls Church? I mean, it's only 2.2 square miles, you know. But something to show that we, you know, we got a plan and we got, here's the number of miles that we replace them at, and it's smart to do that because it's better than repairing them. I mean, you get where I'm going.
And again, this is not just capital replacement, it's maintenance like roof and HVAC systems and things like that. So I'm not really sure that I mean, Cindy is the capital person here, so she can perhaps have some input on it.
Well, although that we've been speaking about Mr. LeCondre, this is one of the items that we've been looking at for a long time in terms of getting reinvestment into our assets. So we're not currently looking at all our facilities having needs right now and how to hold them together until we can do those big projects. So it certainly is facilities, those items that are usually 5 years or less. It is also the vehicles, and it is also our IT equipment. We do not have asset replacement plans funded. We do know what they're valued at. We do know normal end of life and best practices. And so that was the basis of taking that universe and doing funding a steady replacement plan, so we're not peaks at crises, but we can steadily maintain those. So it varies by facility or piece of equipment.
Okay, other comments, questions? First of all, I'd like to thank Ms. Oliver. I know you spent considerable time and effort, and the Budget and Finance Committee and staff that supported it. And John, I guess I could thank you as well. No,
I was just going to ask if I could horn in and ask a question.
absolutely, of course you. Well, I just thank you for your question. How about that?
And I think we talked about this at one of the Budget and Finance meetings. Is there a definition of what is an extraordinary capital project?
The ECP is the George Mason High School.
ECP equals GMHS.
Okay, I
You
mean,
know it when you see it.
Okay, so I would also think it'd be good if we could get that commentary out. We've talked about that for about a month and a half, and I think the public would have a better idea what we're contemplating, which could have significant impact both on the high school and on a tax rate. So I think getting that information out one way or the other would be very helpful. But anyway, thanks again. I know a lot of time and contemplation has been spent on this over the past months, and so much appreciate your fine
And
work.
I just want to add, I mean, I do appreciate all of the members of the Budget and Finance Committee, and thank you to John and Justin for staying for this portion of the conversation. I
not
think it's
you.
also
But not Lawrence.
really important that we take this forward next week.
And Lawrence, too.
And Phil.
I haven't finished.
Carol, get Richard LeCondre in there again.
I think that it's really important that we approve some sort of fiscal policies next week, so that we know on the basis of which we're going forward with our budget guidance and ultimately our budget. And you know, we've made an effort here to try to do a really long-term look. And I know that there is some discomfort with some aspects of the policies, and we can take a look at that. I would ask people to let me know if they believe that they can't, you know, if you can't approve this policy, can you approve it with a change? I would want to know what your thinking would be. But I do think it's important that we wrap this up before we go into the budget period.
Okay, thank you much. Is there anything else on this topic? If not, thank you all for sticking around and for coming out. And your budget guide, no, we'll do budget guidance. Sorry, let's do a little bit of budget guidance then as our last item.
We take one and pass it around.
What's that? All right, well, thank you for sticking around, as long as you did.